There's that small print on the back of racing tickets. Motorsport is dangerous. And if you need warning about something being hazardous to your health before you've even turned up, then that's just going to get the excitement and the adrenaline going. I've heard that Rammstein tickets have similar warnings of them because of the use of pyrotechnics that they love to employ at their shows. Me, however, I'll just stick to, gratuitous violence and strong language from the very start. God, I love the Antiques Roadshow. But all joking aside, while racing cars have become insanely safe over the last 70 years, there are still times when the innocent spectator still pays the price. And this is very true of the 1961 Italian Grand Prix. And Ferrari was the team to beat, having brought in the well-loved 156 Sharknose car for the season, that was driven by Americans Phil Hill and Richard Ginther, and also by German nobleman Count Wolfgang von Trips. It was powered by a 1.5-litre Dino engine, but was later upgraded to a V6 that, with a 120-degree bank, was smoother at producing power than the Dino that was in there before. It was also Ferrari's first mid-engine car, a car that Enzo Ferrari was rather reluctant to have built due to his philosophy of front engine and maximum power. 188 horsepower in 1961. That must have been something else. Only Stirling Moss and Inns Island were able to get a win other than Ferrari that year. Moss would win the season opener at the Monaco Grand Prix, and Moss also took the win at the German Grand Prix on the infamous Nürburgring. While Ferrari had the better car, especially in a straight line, Moss and Lotus were able to make it back up on the more technical tracks. And this isn't British bias, it makes sense. Like I said, Moss won at Monaco and Nürburgring, and the other races of the season that year were at Zandvoort, Spa, Reims, Rom, Aintree and Monza. Well, and Watkins Glen at the end of the season, but Ferrari didn't turn up for reasons we'll explain in a bit. Basically, Ferrari won at the more power-dependent tracks. And while Ferrari was dominating the season, the wins were spread out between the different drivers who had raced in a Ferrari chassis that season. Von Trips took the win at Zandvoort, Hill at Spa, Giancarlo Baghetti won the French Grand Prix in a privately entered Ferrari, and Von Trips took a second win of the season at Aintree. So when the season came to Ferrari's home race at Monza, there were 4 drivers who could win the title, but really, the battle was between the German Count and the American Phil Hill. Monza was considered an end-of-season balls-to-the-wall show of what the cars could do, given that by September, and with usually one race remaining, they would go out and see how fast the cars could truly go. And it was a bit of a glorified test session for some of the teams further down the order with nothing left to race for, to see where they could extract some extra horsepower and top speed for the following season, with their next season's cars in their sheds ready to roll in about 6 to 8 months' time. And actually, at some of these end-of-season races like Monza and Watkins Glen, the teams would bring next season's car if they'd already got it built. And at that time, Monza was the true epitome of speed, especially as the track was to be run in full oval spec. 10 kilometres of pretty much flat out running with only 2 real braking zones into the first Lesmo corner and the Parabolica. The way the track worked was the cars would start where they do today and follow the modern circuit we know and love, but without the chicanes. As they exited the Parabolica, they would be on the right hand side of the track, flying past the pits and going onto the historic banking, which would eventually spit them back out onto the start-finish straight. Given how bumpy that oval was known to be, it must have been terrifying. I maintain these guys back in these days were crazy more than they were brave. And just a year before this, the Italian authorities had decided to run that combined oval and boot-shaped road course to gift Ferrari a win in an otherwise winless season, because the Ferraris were just way better than everybody else in a straight line. The British teams, however, had boycotted that race, and I have done a video on this because they believed the oval wasn't safe. This year, in 1961, they had turned up but still voiced concerns about the safety of the oval, even though that the 1960 race wasn't the bloodbath that they thought it was going to be. The race was, though, at the request of the teams, shortened. It was now 430 kilometres long and not 500 kilometres long, so 43 laps instead of 50. But the general belief from the organisers was, if you don't like it, don't bother turning up because this is how it is. And the teams, begrudgingly, went along with it. 37 cars attempted to qualify for this race. 37 entered and 32 had set fast enough times to qualify, excluding the pole sitter. Today we have the 107% rule. In this race it was 115%, and that time was taken from second place rather than first place. Why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe it was to protect against the pole time being way faster than second place, but it was taken from Ricardo Rodriguez's time, so the cutoff was 3:11.3. Ferrari had entered 4 cars as a works team and given a 5th to a privateer entry, the 4 works drivers being Hill, Von Trips, Ginther, so the 3 regular drivers, and the 4th, a young Mexican called Ricardo Rodriguez. And the 4 Ferraris locked out the first 4 slots on the grid, with Graham Hill's BRM being 2.4 seconds off the pole. But you do need to take into account that at one point in the qualifying session, it had started raining. Race day, however, was a blisteringly hot day and the track was bone dry. The cars were all lined up pretty much how they would be in a modern Grand Prix, 2x2, and all 32 of them on the grid must have made quite the racket. Lord Howe dropped the flag and they all made their way off the start line towards Curva Grande, with Hill and Clark both making their way up towards the back of the leading Ferraris. They basically got a better start because the Ferraris had been geared longer. When they came past the pits to go onto the banking, the order was Ginther, Clark, Phil Hill, Rodriguez, Von Trips, Brabham and Baghetti, with the others keeping in close behind. When they crossed the line to complete the first lap though, the order had become Phil Hill, Ginther, Rodriguez, Clark, Brabham, Von Trips and Baghetti. But as they came round to Parabolica again at high speed, the cars got close. Maybe a little too close. One report says that a large tarpaulin would have covered all 7 of the lead cars, but at some point down the straight between what is now the Ascara chicane and Parabolica, Clark's Lotus and Von Trips' car touched, and the Ferrari was nudged off the track and climbed up the embankment where the spectators were. There was a safety fence separating the fans from the track, and the Ferrari slammed into it. The problem being that the spectators were too close to the fence, and 15 of them were killed from the Ferrari ploughing into that fence. Because this was also the era of no seatbelts, Von Trips was ejected from his car, and there is actually a picture on Alamy of Von Trips lying at the side of the track. The picture's description says that Von Trips is dead, and having seen the way that he is lying, it is very possible he is indeed dead and didn't die later on in hospital. Now, there is footage of the accident as well. What happens is that Von Trips just comes across the front of Clark's car and he gets speared off to the left and towards the spectators that were on that embankment. But because this was the 1960s, the race continued. Clark had skidded to a stop, just missing his head being taken off by the Ferrari as it came back down, and was able to climb out of the car by himself. But the carnage off to the left-hand side of the track was clear to see. There wasn't even an announcement of the accident by the announcers at the track. Most deem the accident to be just that, an accident, something that happens as part of racing. Jimmy wasn't a dirty driver, we know this, and Trips might have just listed a little too far one way, with Jimmy potentially doing the same, because these cars were nowhere near as advanced as they are today. They could have just listed left and they needed more steering input to get back going where they should have been. Now, combing the internet, the same words to the effect of, given how close these cars were, it's a wonder there wasn't a bigger crash, keeps coming up, and Brabham and others somehow managed to avoid the accident. Clark and Von Trips were the only 2 cars involved. It's also believed that the crowds were not told of the accident, or at the very least not told about the deaths, to avoid clogging the roads as people tried to leave the circuit in a panic. A similar tactic, if you want to call it that, was used at Le Mans back in 1955, as they wanted to keep the roads open for the ambulances. But like I said, the race continued on as if nothing had happened. I begin to wonder if the drivers had a look every time they went past, or if they were concentrating too hard, or just weirdly and oddly, and whatever word you want to use, desensitized to it all. By half distance, Hill led Ginther in an American/Ferrari 1-2, with Moss keeping his underpowered Lotus in third ahead of Dan Gurney, albeit 20 seconds behind the leading 2. And these cars were just 4 of 14 left of the 32 that took the green flag. But then Ginther's engine blew up, and at this point Ferrari was down to 3 cars, and suddenly Moss was in a shot of winning the race. But then Moss's engine went. So it was, once again, an American 1-2, just this time it was Phil Hill leading Dan Gurney in the Porsche, and the race ended that way, with Hill leading Gurney over the line. It wasn't quite the dominance of 1950, but at least Ferrari had a home win. But the celebrations were to be muted. With Von Trips' death, it meant that Phil Hill was the world champion. Moss had an outside chance, but he had retired when he needed to win both races, and the championship win of the first American to win the Formula 1 World Championship oddly goes the same way of the second American to win the championship. Phil Hill won the championship after his talented teammate was killed at Monza, and Mario Andretti also won the championship after his talented teammate was killed at Monza. Creepy to think about, really. Formula 1 also never went back to the banking, being abandoned after this race. The banking has been threatened with demolition many times, but it still stands, a silent tribute to those who came before and those who risked it all in the pursuit of glory and speed. Some news reports coming out of the Grand Prix also tried to claim the accident between Clark and Von Trips happened at the banking and tried to blame the banking for the crash in order to have something done about the track. But while these newspapers tried to sensationalise the accident between Clark and Von Trips came at the same time as 2 plane crashes which killed way more people. And that muted these cries. But it did show that it's not just the drivers putting it all on the line. Spectators have and still do pay the price for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but not through the fault of the spectators in any way. A couple of spectators and a policeman were injured at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix after the start line accident involving JJ Leto and Pedro Lamy. There was also a couple of people injured in 1999 at Michigan International Speedway when there was a crash there, but like I say, it's just unfortunate victims of circumstance. But yes, this is Formula 1's darkest day. 16 people at least killed in a freak accident, and the race carrying on as if nothing happened. All part of the show. Nothing to see here. It's crazy to think about, really, as there is no way in a month of Sundays that anything like this would ever be allowed to happen with the current attitudes to safety. There are pictures of the aftermath out there, but they're A, too expensive to license for this video, and B, I'm not showing dead bodies. I'll show the wreckages of the cars, sure, but I'm not showing the actual bodies. But anyway, this has been the story of the 1961 Italian Grand Prix. If you've learned something new from this video here today, then do give the video a like, and if you want to see more from this channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything I do here. Massive thanks to the kind folks over at Patreon, and if you want to help with the buying of pictures for these videos, then you can help out by following the link in the description, where there's also links to Discord and to my socials. And there's also the super thanks if you don't want to do the whole monthly Patreon stuff. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a cracking day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.